We don't just embrace each other physically. We embrace each other mentally, emotionally, spiritually.
For a man, it can go kind of tilt right in the brain and think, okay, a top sex need is non-sexual touching. What is marital intimacy? Let's look at Genesis chapter 2, verse 25. He says, and they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. And so what we're looking at here is in the area of spiritual, emotional, and physical intimacy. And this is where you are completely exposed to your spouse. They see and know everything about you, and you're not holding anything back. You're not putting any walls up.
And so basically for the husband, his definition of marital intimacy is usually sex, and her definition is usually talk. So we encourage couples, talk about what would it look like. So depending on where you are in that spectrum we talked about earlier, what would it look like what is your definition of if our marriage is healthy? What is your definition of if our marriage is intimate? What if our marriage was better? What would we be doing or not doing in that case? And then you want to discuss those definitions if you can. We know that there's people all across that spectrum. You may not be able to talk about some of these things. And so we hope that you'll just prayerfully consider, well, how can I use this to work on my own on the marriage? Because if you engage with an unwilling spouse, that usually can make it spiral in a negative direction. So we encourage you to use the material cautiously, but discuss and come up with a we definition of what would an intimate marriage look like.
So you don't want to cross your spouse's definition, right? So Rhonda's going to have a definition of what marital intimacy looks like to her, as well as I will, right? So if, for example, one time she said, well, something I said, she said, well,
tone of voice.
Yeah, firm tone of voice. Well, she said that's not in my definition of an intimate marriage. Okay, so that's what that's what our goal is, right? And so if I'm doing an action or something that is crossing her definition, but it doesn't cross mine, it would be okay with me. It wouldn't redefine our marriage to me. But if it redefines our marriage to her, then I need to change that, or I am redefining the marriage.
Because it depends on where you are in your marriage. So we're pushing to go to the next level in our marriage, not content to where we are, but we are content with where we are. But we're always growing to the next level. So you kind of have to know, what does that look like for us to get from here to there? And so that's kind of what you would want to think. And so when we talk about the concepts in this particular lesson, you might want to have in mind, what would it look like if our marriage was closer than it is now? We might have less of this going on and more of this going on.
So we want to look at what really has the greatest impact on marital growth. And so this is where we look at your relationship with God as being that top thing that we talked about in session 1, right? So this is where you seeking God and you putting Him first and growing in your relationship with God is going to translate over into a greater level of intimacy with your spouse.
And like we said earlier, usually couples will tell us when they're doing this, they have greater sensitivity toward their spouse, they're more patient with their spouse, and they care more about doing what's right for their spouse. So, if you're a little challenged with wanting to do some of the things God's Word says to do or to grow in those things, then work on your relationship with the Lord and let the Lord deal with your heart first.
So in studies that have been done, it's actually been found that the spiritual component, a man being the spiritual leader in the home, is a top sex need for women. And so for most men, you hear something like that and you kind of go tilt. It's like, I don't get that. So women know and understand that creates a more secure and a stable environment. Women, that is a top need for them, for stability and security.
Because when the husband is a spiritual leader in the home, it builds trust. Because obviously if she's listening to the Lord, if he's listening to the Lord and following the Lord and being obedient to the Word, she can trust him and it draws her to him.
For example, on my phone, I have this picture of Rhonda that's really attractive picture of her that I like. And she has a picture of me on her phone holding our cat, or holding our grandbaby. Why? Because this is speaking to her sensitivity, right? and that I can be touched.
Right? So spiritual needs. What are some of the spiritual needs we have? Daily Bible study and prayer, church attendance, fellowship. And those are things that in the marriage, you want to be on the same page as a couple. So if you're working toward marital intimacy and you can talk about these things, we would encourage you, talk through a plan where you have shared goals. What would you each be doing in the relationship if you have a spiritual connectivity going on as a couple?
So you want to make goals in the area of your spiritual life, and you want to understand you don't want to, I have my own goals of this is what I think, doing something spiritually would look like, and then Rhonda has a different definition. We want to be on the same page, and we want to understand for each other, right, who does what, and what our goals are, and what that looks like to be a spiritual leader in the home. Okay, so now we want to look at that marital intimacy is not going to happen unless there's three components present that create a safe environment. And basically that's going to be answering the question, are you there for me? And these three things are trust, being emotionally available, and responding sensitively.
So let's talk about trust. If trust is not present in the relationship, there's not a safe environment in the marriage, right? And that simply is believing that the spouse is good-willed in his or her motives and intentions. And so basically, if you want your spouse to trust you, you wouldn't be dismissing negative emotions, which we'll get into in a bit. You want to be listening attentively and empathetically to your spouse.
So what's the ground floor, right, for your relationship with God? There's faith, right? That's the first entry level into walking with God is we have faith. And it's really the ground floor in our relationship with our spouse. Trust has to be present. So we need to be addressing areas where trust has been betrayed. What makes you feel like you can or cannot trust me?
And if you can talk about that in your marriage, that would be a great question. Emotionally, on an emotional level, do you feel that there's trust there? Can you trust me to really hear your heart? We know that a lot of marriages might not feel there's trust if there's infidelity, pornography, addictions in the pictures. But you know what? If we regularly dismiss or discount our spouse's perspective, there's not trust in the picture either.
And so we don't want to become defensive. So Rhonda mentioned that about being able to not dismiss negative emotions. Women need to be able to release their negativity or the negative emotions that they're experiencing. A lot of times men are shutting down when they hear that and maybe becoming defensive. And so we want to understand our spouse's perspective that's different from our own. All right, the second thing is being emotionally available, and that's being available for your spouse anytime that they're wanting to engage with you. And that means focus of your eyes and your ears and your heart.
And so that means without distraction, with eager interest and whenever asked. So can you picture what that looks like in the marriage? So one person wants to talk about something, and if the other one says, I don't want to talk about that, that's not being emotionally available. And so these are things that you'll find in the research. These three things are supportive of marital intimacy and relational safety. And so, the thing is, usually what's going on in the marriage, we're supporting the patterns that are happening with the way we do and don't do things. And if we want something different, we have to support something different. And so that's kind of what we're presenting. And so when we think of emotional availability, that means that someone is going to be paying attention. They're not doing something on their phone or half listening.
Or maybe, you're busy. Maybe you had a really tiring day at work. And so you cannot be available. You can be checked out, right? Your spouse is trying to make a connection with you, but you're not there.
And so in the studies, they basically show that in a happy marriage, spouses consider that their spouse is emotionally available to them. So some of the problems, like Sean said, someone could be busy or tired and emotionally unavailable for that reason. And so, what can you do to kind of work that out so that you can make yourself available to your spouse? But also some people can have discomfort with being close. Maybe they're just not accustomed to emotional closeness.
They don't know how to go there. And so,
That's the case for a
yeah,
lot of men,
yeah,
actually.
it is. And so you got the classic image, right, of Lucy and Ricky, and he's sitting there with the newspaper up, right? And she's sitting over there chattering away, talking, and he is, grunting, and she finally pushes the newspaper down, right? So that's a good image, right, of what you don't want to do and how you can be insulating yourself from your spouse.
Another thing is some people are unsure how to relate, and this is where women can really help in the marriage. Women are typically more relational, like we've said, and can help to train the husband, if he is trainable, to learn how to develop these skills. Because let's face it, if you're going to connect male and female, you have to connect, and we'll get into this more and more, in the ways that both bring to the table. She brings the emotional connectivity, he the physical connectivity especially.
Maybe the priorities are out of order. And maybe for men, right, this is not right up on the top of most men's list, that I want to be, emotionally available, or that I even understand what connecting with my wife on an emotional level. But guess what? If you're going to connect with a woman, you're going to have to learn how to deal with this area of being emotionally available, because women are emotional creatures.
Because we don't just embrace each other physically, we embrace each other mentally, emotionally, spiritually as well. Another thing could be resentment. If we have a lot of unresolved issues, resentment is likely building, and a person typically is not available emotionally when they've got too many walls between them, obviously. And so you want to make sure that you're addressing the things that can hinder being emotionally available. So I would challenge you to think, when my spouse has something that they need to share with me, how emotionally available am I? Do I hear what they're saying? And the voice of their, the sound of their words pass through the air, just like the ticking of the clock. But did I hear what my spouse was really saying?
So I didn't grow up with any sisters, so when we got married, it was fairly new territory of learning how to understand the complexity of emotion with a woman, right? And so, this area of responding sensitively, a lot of times it's going to be a woman saying, well, your tone of voice was harsh, right? And so a man can just blow past that because it's like, well, I didn't intend that, or no, I didn't come across that way. But that's way, men, I think, just come across, like we talked about before, in a more commanding, and our voice is deeper, and it's going to sound in a way that can shut a woman down.
Well, it's like men talk to men. And so if a man is talking to his wife like he would talk to his coworkers or other men in his life, it probably doesn't sound very emotional or relational, because men don't typically interact that way, and they're not used to interacting that way.
How did you feel about that I said?
Joe, how was your night last night? What did you feel? Men aren't used to that. They're not accustomed to that. They don't know how to do that. We're going to dive into it a little bit more as we get into it. But responding sensitively has to do with responding sensitively to our thoughts, feelings, ideas, and emotions, basically validating our spouse.
Am I coming across in a approachable way? So we think about in James 3 or 4, he says, the wisdom which is above is, first of all, easy to be entreated. You think about God is easy to be entreated, right? He welcomes us. Ask what you will, and it shall be done unto you. He's saying you can come and you can approach unto the throne of grace boldly. But am I giving that same kind of approach to my wife? Am I saying you can come before me and ask what you will?
And so if we respond sensitively to our spouse, we're going to show curiosity and interest. We're going to have a positive response. Remember, we're not wanting to kick out the spouse's perspective. That doesn't mean I have to agree with everything or see everything the way Sean sees it. It does mean I need to hear and validate it, because that's the reality on his side of the relationship.
So I need to be able to hear the message that she's presenting from her heart. Sometimes we can get hung up on, well, these words came out of your mouth. Well, you said this, and therefore you meant this. We need to be able to back up and hear, what were you intending to communicate? Not just drilling down on these are the words that came out of your mouth, but what is the message of your heart? Sometimes we can hear the words, but we didn't get the message. So we need to hear, what's the message you're wanting to communicate to me, not just what words I hear came out of your mouth and I ran with it, and boy, this is what you meant.
Because it's not all about when I'm the listener, it's not all about what I think you're saying. It's what are you actually saying, and caring enough to check and make sure I got the right message. So to sensitively respond, a person would heartily receive and understand the heart message and consider both perspectives, not just my own.
So obviously what we're talking about here is we're not just talking about, how can you basically be married. We're talking about how can you take your marriage to intimacy, right? So we're not talking about ground level. We're talking about how can you move beyond where you are, regardless of where you are, regardless of how close you are. Just like in your relationship with God, right? You don't want to just stay where you are when you got saved. You want to be growing. And as you grow, God starts revealing different things. Maybe some things that were okay when you first got saved, they're not okay today. The way you thought then, the way that you spoke to people then is not okay now. Now you have to grow, and that's all part of this same picture that we're presenting.
And so we would encourage you again, remember the perspective that we talked about in the first session. It's not all about my spouse this and my spouse that. It's all about, Lord, what do I need to change? And so it's looking at, do I respond sensitively? Am I emotionally available? Am I trustworthy with my spouse's heart? Does my spouse feel like that he can share his heart with me and I'm going to receive it well?
So guess what? We don't always deal with positive things in our marriage, right? So negative things come up, negative things have to be addressed. And so this is where we're not failing on how positively we get along. If there's any failure, it's in dealing with the negative things. And so we need to understand how to create a safe environment for our spouse when something negative is presented.
And so the thing is, if Sean appreciates and loves me, if I share the positive things, and if I share things that are even neutral, and then I share something negative and I feel rejected, I feel like that's not important. I feel like it's just not on his radar. It's not at the top of his list. Guess what? It doesn't matter that he accepted all the positive and all the neutral. I feel rejected, right? And so when we talk about getting in tune in the marriage, we're talking about how do we respond when something negative is shared by the spouse. And if you want to have an intimate marriage, you have to talk about those things. Because if I'm going to go inside this heart and look around, I'm going to see some stuff in there about me that I need to be able to handle. I need to be able to hear if I had a little bit of sassy tone to my voice, right? Which will really escalate the men. And we women don't always realize I have a sassy tone there. And if we allow the man the freedom to say, that felt sassy, or to the women, if it was a firm or a harsh tone, because that's one of the number one things we hear from the men and the women is tone of voice. She tends to sound aggressive and abrasive, and he tends to sound harsh and abusive, basically.
So that's what we want to talk about now is how do you create a welcoming environment when it comes to negative things that need to be presented in your marriage. And so we have an acronym here, which is ATTUNE, A-T-T-U-N-E. A is awareness of the emotion. This is both awareness of the emotion, both of yourself and of your spouse.
And we do give credit, this is Dr. John Gottman's acronym here. But basically, first you have to be aware of yourself. I have to realize if I'm going to listen to Sean's negative feelings or thoughts or ideas, I have to realize when I'm beginning to escalate or close. If I cannot be aware of myself, then what happens is I will become defensive, or I will not be able to hear. I'll tune him out or something, and I will escalate and begin to show, not make him feel safe in that environment. But I also have to be aware of Sean. I have to be sensing, what is he feeling right now? Notice that in this, it's not about me. When Sean has a negative something to share, I have to set aside my agenda, and that takes a lot of self-control. The fruit of the Spirit are really called upon and developed in the marital relationship. The deeper you go, the finer tuned we become in the development of the fruit of the Spirit. Our spouse should be partaking of those fruits. And so when we're growing in our self-control, I'm not thinking about me. but I'm attuning to Sean.
So let's talk about, I think particularly with men, the self-awareness of emotion that's building. And I know I've dealt with this, and just in our break time, a couple of guys we were talking with, the holding back. A lot of times men think that, I'm going to hold it down. She's sharing these things, and I'm not going to let it out, like it's more noble for us to hold back these things. And then we get to this breaking point that I can't hold it back anymore, and I blow up then. And then she's wondering, women, I think, not all the time, but are releasing these emotions and things a little bit all along and not blowing up.
Right. And so another thing is turning toward. And so that's the first T. Basically, turning toward means that I'm going to connect with my spouse's concern instead of ignoring it, and instead of flipping the topic to my topic. So basically, that would have to do with some connecting words maybe. I might say things like, it would make sense to me that you would feel that way, or I understand that that's what you were thinking. I don't have to agree with it. I don't have to feel that way myself to connect with and validate Sean.
And the next T is tolerance. And this is really us allowing our spouse to be different than us versus a be like me attitude. We don't need to be coming across to our spouse that I only accept you is if you are a yes man. Basically you say yes to everything. You always agree with everything that I say. We need to allow our spouse to be different.
And so it's tolerating whatever the spouse's picture is. If we're both going to contribute and we're going to put the he and the she on the table to see what is the we that needs to come out of this, we have to be tolerant of things that are not me, things that are outside of my thoughts and feelings. And then the you would be for understanding. You want to make sure that you heard that message. Instead of, like we said a while ago, I heard the noise of your voice, but I didn't hear. Like he says, he that has ears to hear, let him hear.
Yeah, you think about how many times do you hear that phrase in the Bible, hear, let he that has ears to hear. What is he saying? Not just that you heard the words rattling, but that something happened and on the inside you were able to hear what your spouse is saying.
And so we know we're going through a lot of this fairly quickly. We would encourage you to take this home and break it down prayerfully between you and the Lord, to see, these pieces, what that looks like for you.
So N is for non-defensive listening, and this is one of the biggest hindrances to hearing. This is an area I had to really work on, right? So Rhonda brought up something, that I needed to change, make a change in some area. Well, and this is why, I have a good defense, as if everything that she presented would just suddenly go away if I had the right answer, and that's not the way we need to be.
And so, we use a lot of times the firm tone, sassy tone kind of as an example, because it's one we dealt with. And so, for example, if I say to Sean, hey, would you be careful not to use a firm tone with me? It has negative connotations for me, and I begin to either close or escalate when I engage with that. And anybody else, I do not engage. If a man is talking in a firm tone, I will probably not be hanging around very long. There's a lot of negativity for me there. And so, however, if Sean responds with well, if you hadn't talked to me in that sassy tone, I wouldn't have talked to you, and I might be like, I didn't even realize I did that. But guess what? If I'm the one that initiates and I share that, then I need Sean to know, regardless of what prodded him to talk to me like that, that's still not okay with me. Yes, I need to hear if I had a tone, right? And that'll be Sean's choice to address that or not. But you can't address multiple issues at one time. So basically, whoever initiates is the speaker, and the other person has to play the role of listener.
Basically, if she presents something to me that I need to make a change in, I may have a problem that I need to bring up, but I need to set mine aside right then and wait till it's my turn.
Turns.
And I need to stay laser focused on what she brought up and addressing the issue that she presented to her satisfaction. And then I can come back and say, hey, I would like to present something now, and then it kind of turns around.
And the thing is, if we're defensive, even on the inside, and we're not saying it, we're probably not listening. We're defending ourselves. We're feeling attacked. our perspective is off. We are not hearing the heart of our spouse. And usually what we see is when a spouse is sharing something felt negative to me, they're sharing their heart. But the spouse is taking it as you're blaming and accusing and saying, I did this and I did that. And it's like, no, I'm not. I'm just saying what's going on right here. And I need you to come and look at this. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about Rhonda right now.
So many times that's why couples cannot resolve issues, is because one of them will bring up an issue and the other one will come back and say, well, I have an issue that you brought up an issue, or I have an issue with your issue. And then it's like, well, I have an issue that you have an issue with my issue. You see what I'm saying? And it's multiple issues. Right. Nobody gets the satisfaction of, I'm the speaker and you're the listener, right, and we're going to stay with this one and address it.
And the way to turn that bad cycle, it's a very negative cycle, is for someone to decide, I'm going to be the listener. And if my spouse won't listen to me, I'm going to listen to my spouse. And I'm going to really connect with what my spouse has to say to me right now.
E is for empathy, and this is connecting with the feelings of the message, how it feels to be you. And I think this is really, we're going to mention this at one earlier, that I think this can be a really humbling thing, okay? So when your spouse is hurt by some behavior that you have done or something that you've said, to allow yourself to be hurt with what hurt them.
Right. And this empathy is head and heart. So it's not just hearing the words and gathering the message, but it's also connecting on a heart level with the feeling behind the words.
So we want to talk about bids. And so if we're going to be attuned to our spouse and to what they're presenting and the negativity that they need to present, we need to be able to notice bids. Well, bids are what we call seemingly unimportant, everyday verbal and nonverbal requests.
So this can be a request for attention, interest, affection, assistance, support. It might be a comment or a smile or a look, right, that we want a response.
So think about how many times during your day your spouse says something to you. They didn't say, oh, would you give me your undivided attention? Or would you pay attention? Or would you give a comment? They just say something. Or maybe they just glance at you and they're waiting for a response. What if you
just to be noticed?
What if you don't give that response, right? Or it sure is beautiful outside today.
Wow, it is. It's so amazing. Let's go outside and enjoy it.
Right. So see, or
that's an enthusiastic.
Or you could just see a look in their eye, a little glimmer of, I noticed you, or I'm thinking something, and they're looking for you to connect with something. So these are things you could easily overlook and go on and say, I don't know why marriage isn't working for us. But you're missing these subtle things, these little things that anybody else might miss.
Because our response is either build or deplete our emotional bank account. And so we're overlooking the little things. Remember we said earlier in Revelation it says return to the first things. Well, the little things, noticing all the little things is what we used to do, and it's what we need to do to maintain it. And so we talked about turning toward and enthusiastically turning toward. And so if Sean also said, wow, it's a beautiful day outside today.
No, it isn't.
That's turning against, right? But if I say it's a beautiful day out there and he doesn't say anything at all, right.
You see what I'm saying? So that was kind of a failed connection.
Away,
There was a moment I could connect with her, and I can either make it or break it. I can miss it. I can connect with her. Think about what is it in Ecclesiastes? It talks about a threefold cord. It's not easily broken. Think about the many strands that make up connection and strength. And we can either make more connection with our spouse or less.
And so we need to make each other aware of these bids. Wow, I just made a bid. And so, we shouldn't say, yeah, my husband never notices what I do. Well, coach him, help him a little bit, or help her. I just made a bid. And then your spouse then can say, oh, wow, what did you say? Because we all will overlook them. But the thing is, the response choices that we make concerning bids determines our marital trajectory. And so if I think in successful marriages, the spouses connect with bids about 85% of the time, but in failing marriages, they only connect about 33% of the time.
So we're not just talking about noticing surface things, right? We're talking about noticing deeper things. And in this noticing of bids, we want to notice deeper needs.
Kind of two different things. So the bids are more of the surface level, like a look or a brief comment. And then we're going to dig a little deeper now into those deeper needs that he and she would have. So basically, the seen reveals the unseen. Basically, the man desires to go deeply into her physically, but she craves for him to go deeply into her emotionally.
Men can be thought of as being sexually insatiable, but women can be thought of as being emotionally insatiable.
When we don't meet each other's deepest needs, our zest for life just disappears. And so basically, we know the world exploits male sexuality, right? We see that all over the place. But it also exploits the female emotionality. Look at the Hallmark and chick flicks and all of the romance novels building up according to that woman's deeper need and playing on that.
So we can have unrealistic expectations in these areas. And these are things that we need to be able, as a couple, to talk about and understand. And so we want to look at the sexual tension that a man experiences.
Basically, a man's body becomes accustomed to a sexual frequency because of his testosterone cycle due to it. And a decrease in the usual sexual frequency impacts him physiologically and mentally.
And so men find it difficult to explain to their wife what's going on with them in this area, and to even prevent the effect that it has on them emotionally and to their attention, and find it difficult to, they want to have more control over this area in their lives.
And sexual release relieves stress and creates a focus on the wife, because in that moment, more than any other, oxytocin, the cuddle hormone, is released. And guess what? It's kind of causing a bonding effect in the male brain toward his wife.
And so the man's love for his wife is going to grow as she is being more attentive to his sexual need.
So she needs to respond to sexually nurture him, but her lack of sexual interest will hinder emotional and general marital intimacy.
All right, so now we want to look at the emotional tension that a woman experiences. And this is an area, that it can be difficult for a woman just to lay aside all the events of the day just because they want to have time in the bedroom.
And so we want to be clear here that we're talking about the physical intimacy and the counterpart in the female of the emotional intimacy. The male needs sexual intercourse and the woman needs emotional intercourse, if you will.
Well, so God designed us to care for a need that is not our own. Right. And so as I am meeting her emotional need, it actually creates within her the desire to meet my sexual need.
This cyclical, the
right.
way they work with each other. And so basically, her sexual desire is nurtured when he embraces her in the other areas of life.
And so a woman needs her husband to compliment her and know that he isn't annoyed with her emotional complexities, right? So women are emotional creatures and complex to understand. And when you show patience to her in helping her work through and process her emotionality, really, it's going to increase that for her.
So emotional release helps her process what's going on inside of her. She can't just turn it off, just like the man can't just turn off his sexual desires. And it helps her to connect the resulting positive feelings that she feels when he does care about her emotionally and he hears her out. She connects those to him, and it endears him to herself.
So a man taking care of his wife outside the bedroom is going to help her turn toward him in the bedroom. And this is many times something that we've looked at as that a man can do simple things, like maybe a woman is so overwhelmed with there's laundry that needs to be done, there's dirty dishes, getting the children in bed and getting their baths. A man can do some of these little simple things to take chores and things off of a woman's to-do list, and help her to focus then on their time together.
So basically, as we meet each other's needs, we're setting the stage for sexual satisfaction. And so we need to prioritize passion in the bedroom. And so a woman kind of needs the man to understand her definition of sexual satisfaction, be emotionally and sexually gentle with her outside the bedroom, help her feel safe and secure, heard and accepted, appreciated and encouraged.
And the man needs his wife to make him feel that he is wanted, needed, respected, and that she's happy in the bedroom, and increasing the likelihood that he'll want to serve her outside the bedroom.
When you never want to insist that your spouse do something they're not comfortable with or that goes against their conscience. And but the thing is, women can awaken their sexuality. This is something to embrace. It's what the husband brings to the table. And just like we would like for the man to awaken emotionality for us women, we can awaken sexuality by scheduling time for sex so that we can prepare our minds for that. If we're exhausted, maybe the husband can give the wife time to maybe get some rest, help out with the children, for example.
And to talk about sex. And so such an important area of the relationship like sex. It's like, why is it that you find that most couples aren't talking about it? Yeah. They aren't open to each other about saying, here's what I really like, I don't like, and here's what things help in this area. And so one thing, one way we look at this too is that God has made each one caretakers of different areas of the relationship, okay? So men are typically of the relationship caretakers of the physical intimacy side, right. And women are more caretakers of the emotional intimacy side of the relationship. So we want to look now at the sex needs for each one. So the sex needs for men. What are they? And this is information that's based on more, survey type stuff that was taken. And it's we're going to look at 3 areas that were shown as being really high sex needs for men and women. Okay, so for men, we're going to look at 3, which is mutual satisfaction, responsiveness, and initiation.
So as far as mutual satisfaction, he needs to know that he pleases her sexually, that she's interested in him, that she's still attracted to him, because his self-esteem can be stripped when she has an it doesn't matter attitude. But instead, women, we need to celebrate our husband's sexuality and masculinity. He needs to feel like a hero in the bedroom. And a lot of women wonder, why doesn't my husband want to connect with me? Well, maybe the thing that is most important to him, of his greatest need in the marriage, maybe we act like we don't even care. Maybe he acts like he doesn't even care. You see that cycle there? When he doesn't care about her emotional needs, she doesn't care about his sexual needs. He loses interest emotionally, makes her lose interest sexually, and so somebody kind of has to break that cycle to get it going in a different direction.
He wants to feel like it's a we thing, not
right.
Just a me thing. Okay, so responsiveness.
So her lack communicates that she doesn't want to be close to him.
A man expresses closeness sexually, and it builds his sexual confidence. And he feels appreciated and desires to express appreciation in response.
Here's a quote from Jim Sanderson that I thought was touching. You cannot believe the frustration and ultimately the anger a man feels in trying to excite and express his love to a woman who month after month, year after year is only paying her dues. Quite often her passive resistance finally defeats him. He forgets the joy and strength he once knew. She emasculates him. It's kind of sad, isn't it? We see the male and the female in the marriage both being stripped of what they bring to the table for the marriage, just because the other one doesn't get it, just because the other one doesn't have a good picture of the other person's need.
It's like we're both celebrating, right, what God gave our spouse to be the caretaker of. In that she is the caretaker of the emotional area of our relationship, I celebrate that. I'm not putting that down or squelching it, and vice versa with the sexual area.
And as you look at that more, you kind of see, like we said, the unseen shows the seen shows the unseen. Think through that and see, as you look at the male sexuality and the female emotionality, and see the similarities there, because there's a lot of similarities in that picture.
So the third area that we're looking at for top sex need for men is initiation, and this is tied to the man's sense of self-worth.
He needs to be pursued physically. It fulfills his sexual desires.
And shows that he's still desirable to her.
And it also shows that she still wants him and she finds him attractive. And so if a woman is flirting and taking and initiating sex at times, it communicates she's interested in him and not just fulfilling requests.
And so if this area, these needs are not being met, there's going to leave a man feeling rejected, and he's going to begin responding negatively and withdrawing and make him vulnerable to temptation.
So as a woman, we need to be able to say yes, but we also need to know how to say no. If for some reason a woman needs to say no, it's appropriate to share why. And it's also appropriate to say, but I can at such and such a time. And that way we don't make the spouse feel rejected. So basically, as women, we need to see ourselves as sexual.
And men need to see ourselves as emotional, right? So this is taking some work. We're both coming and making some adjustments.
And we can coach each other on these things, but we also need to be talking about these things. How well am I as a woman taking care of sexuality in our marriage? How well is Sean as a man taking care of emotionality or the emotional needs in the marriage?
All right, so let's look at a woman's sex needs. What are they?
Basically, she needs non-sexual touch. She needs to be hugged, touched, and kissed.
And this is going to communicate that he likes and wants to understand her.
And
so a lot of times I think for a man it can go kind of tilt right in the brain to think, okay, a top sex need is non-sexual touching.
Right.
It's like,
this is the kind of
really?
touching that you would do with your mother, your daughter, your sister. It doesn't lead to anything. It's just simply a caring, you mean something to me touch. And women have to have that.
And it's saying, I love you and want you, not for what you can give to me, not what I can get from you,
Right.
but for who you are.
And Dr. Gary and Barbara Roseberg said, non-sexual touch or affection is intimacy in and of itself. It's not the means to an end. In many situations, it is the end. For the woman, it is the goal. So another thing that a woman needs is romance.
And that is spending time together. It is an atmosphere to be created, not a spontaneous mood, and is showing that he cares about and is interested in her.
And that's different for every woman. So that's something that you can talk about. What creates a romantic attitude for you, a romantic atmosphere? It communicates she's loved and desirable, and it gives sex purpose and keeps the relationship alive. Can you see how all of these things feed into each other and create little cycles? And we're responding to these little things, and we're promoting these little things, and we don't even realize we're doing it.
So, I mean, think about this, and we may cover this somewhere else, but it's kind of like that a man providing this environment for his wife allows her to see, sex belongs in the relationship, which without these things, it's almost like, where does it go? I don't see where it belongs.
Right, and so the thing is, when a man is meeting his wife's need for emotional connectivity, sex makes sense because it's an outward expression of what's happening in the relationship. But when a man won't connect and won't listen to his wife, and we talked about the hearing negative emotions and feelings, and when a man doesn't do that, sex just feels like it doesn't belong. Why would we do that? I mean, we're not close. And a lot of men don't realize they're doing that. And yet, that you would hear us say these things. Women, you need to do this for your husband and do this for your husband. But we have to realize we both contribute to these cycles. And so if we're seeing, for example, a wife's disinterest in sexuality in the marriage, we have to ask ourselves, what am I doing that contributes to that? And what could I do to break that cycle and establish a new cycle?
So in the context of baseball, if sex is a home run, these are the bases, right? So you don't get to there if you don't go past the bases.
And what you see a lot of times, because that is the seen realm and we can see and keep up with frequency of physical interaction, but we can't see and maybe enumerate the emotional interactions. And so what a lot of times you see in the marriages that are struggling especially is everybody's meeting their sexual needs, unless they're just about to divorce, and then they may not be, right? But they're not meeting the wife's emotional needs. And so a lot of times, well, a man may, when we're meeting with them, it may have been a while since they've had sex, but it's maybe been years since she's had emotional intercourse. And she's been dying all along. And he's like, what happened? I don't understand what's going on. She cried to him for years.
He's starving her.
And he never heard her heart. And that's why hearing hearts is critical, so that you don't have one spouse bailing in the marriage and the other one is clueless. And that way we're up to date on where are we in this marriage. If you score this marriage 0 to 100 like a test grade, where are we? Why are we there? Why did you give it a score that high or that low? What do we need to do to move that up a couple of notches?
So if you don't want sex to lose its meaning and just become a chore, then you're going to have to do the things that for the wife it makes sense and it belongs in the relationship, because these things are in place.
And so ask questions, pay attention when she lets you know what her preferences are.
Do the little things and surprise her with things that communicate to her you're special.
And so, making connection, and we're over, so we're going to make this really quick, but making connection, for connectivity in the relationship, a woman needs face-to-face connectivity and a lot of eye contact.
It means being relational.
Yeah, include her in your life.
All right, it needs to be communication on a deeper level, right? You can have surface level communication, which is just small talks and facts, but you need to have a deeper communication about feelings and needs, desires, and beliefs.
And so he needs shoulder-to-shoulder interaction. That's activities, sexual needs being met. They're different emotionally. And another thing that a man tends to need is positivity in the home. And that's huge for the men. Because when a woman's trying to address issues, she brings a lot of negativity in the home. And she doesn't realize she's doing it. She means well, and she's trying to address issues, and it's probably happening because he's not listening and engaging. But for the man, it pushes him away. And so some of the things we've talked about can help reduce that negativity in the day-to-day part of life.
So increasing their connection together is going to mean resolving issues and developing friendship.
Those are huge topics in and of themselves. Affirmation is huge. She has affirmation. She needs public and private compliments. She needs him to actively listen and notice what she does, overlook her faults, and show appreciation. Because without it, she's going to feel undervalued and unappreciated, rejected and unloved.
All right, for the man, affirming him is going to be appreciating who he is, and as a lover, showing an interest in the things he does, appreciating his fix-it mentality, even when you didn't ask for it, cheering him on toward his goals.
So basically, together, affirmation looks like sharing of power and receiving influence, mutual influencing on each other there.
All right, we tried to cram in a lot of information, a lot of material there, and so we want to open up now for Q&A.
Any questions?
Or comments?
That was packed, and we don't know whether to be apologetic or what. You can take it home and think through the pieces.
Yeah. So okay, so one thing I think about this. Okay, so this is an area that I think as we studied this material, went over, I think, goodness, now for probably it's been 2 years that we've been studying over this intimacy area. Okay. One thing I think that we don't typically talk about these areas, right? And these are truths, and these are things that both men understand, and I think, and women understand, but maybe haven't put it into words, and definitely haven't said it to their spouse. Yeah. But these are truths, right? Because I mean, these are things that I know when I heard these things, I thought, yeah, I felt that way, but never said it to her. Yeah. Never knew how to put it into words and say, yeah, that's the way God designed me. That's the way He made me, right? Or that's the way He made my wife. But the more we understand about this is the way God made us. This is not just something that we dropped on us out of the sky. Yeah. This is the design of our Creator. Now, how can we work with the way our Creator? This was not a mistake. It's not a mistake that He made men to have that sexual need. It's not a mistake that He made women to have that emotional need.
Right. And so the thing is, it's like, and raise your hands because we're looking if you have any questions. It's like Jesus said, I stand at the door and knock. And so we need to stand at the door and knock on our spouse's heart. And then we need to be invited in. We need to open up to allow our spouse to come deeply into who we are. But the thing is, a lot of couples never get inside the door. They've not been in the foyer or the immediate living room of their spouse's heart in years.
God has empowered you, each one, to meet the needs of your spouse. Now, there's, I'm sure, times that you don't feel empowered. Maybe you feel like, I don't know how in the world to meet your need, right? And maybe you feel like you're drawing a blank. But God didn't make a mistake. Right. And when He says that something is owed, that we looked at in 1 Corinthians 7, you owe something to your spouse and you're to give it. He isn't asking you to give something that He didn't first empower you to give. So you don't need to be thinking that God is asking me to give something and I don't have the power wherewith to give it to my spouse. Right? We need to look for it. It's there. We need to draw on it. Something's inside of us. Just because we don't see it, just because we don't feel it, doesn't mean it isn't there. We need to draw it out.
Well, and I think, the big thing is, too, that one thing about going into each other's hearts and caring about those things, we can't do that if our eyes are on me. If I hear me and see me more than I hear Sean and see Sean, we cannot connect. I have just sentenced the marriage to disconnect and then wonder, why does he feel irritable toward me? Or why is he talking to me like that? Because I created a distance. All I care about is me, and everything is revolving around me in this marriage. If I can set me aside and die to self, die daily, like Paul talks about, in the context of the marriage, so that the marriage can live. Because the thing is, if I cling to myself, if I cling to this life, the marriage will die. But when we lay down everything for God and we lay everything down, we know that's how we live, right? We know it's a spiritual truth. It's a spiritual truth in the marriage. When I lay me down spiritually, relationally, maritally, then in that context, and to the extent I do, marriage can thrive. To the extent I am selfish and self-focused, and I look at my spouse through myself, we cannot thrive. It brings death to the relationship. It's like a death cycle. And to break that, I have to care about this man right here. I want him to be the happiest man, and that's kind of my goal, is for him to be the happiest man there is. That is my ministry, and if he is the happiest man, I can stand before God and hear, well done, good and faithful servant.
Are there questions that we need to be asking our spouse, but we don't want to go there because we don't want to hear the answer? How can I better meet your needs? How can I better take care of you? What do you need from me?
Any questions? We can go on. Yeah.
So for a couple that's struggling with intimacy, you guys just nailed down, the whole section was amazing. What would be, walk out of here today, what would be step one?
So when you say intimacy, are you talking about physical?
Physical or emotional. If a couple walks out of here today and they say, what is step one? We realize we're struggling in the area of intimacy. Maybe both, maybe one or the other. What is step one for the couple to do? What can we do tonight when we get home with our spouse to begin this journey?
We talked about in session 1 unconditional acceptance, and that's got to be a step. What relationship with the Lord is first. If you don't have a good relationship there, you're not going to care here. And then unconditional love and acceptance, accepting the spouse as is foundational.
I think the first thing that we really talked about in this was trust. Okay?
Yeah.
Where was trust broken? Where was trust betrayed? Because we're going to only open up to the level that I feel like I feel received by my spouse. Right? If I feel like that I can't trust her with my feelings because she's going to trample all over them, I'm going to limit, right? It says the man and his wife were naked and they were not ashamed. There was complete openness, complete vulnerability, complete trust.
And so the goal is, with the unconditional love and acceptance and what Sean said, the goal is the focus on spouse. We have to get the focus off self. That is a carnal way to behave in a marriage. And it is deadly. And we have to see that no matter what in life, as a parent, as a Christian, as a spouse, if we are carnal and we're focusing on self and elevating self, we can't be trusted because we don't care. And we have to put the other person first and have that servant heart attitude toward the spouse.
So think about the kingdom of God flips the script, right? He said the Gentiles say, rule over, but he says in the kingdom of God, you're going to serve, right? And to gain, you give, right? So it just goes against. So if I want to receive my need being met, guess what he tells me to do? Meet her need.
Yeah.
I meet a need that's not my own. She needs emotional intimacy. I forget about necessarily all this that I need. I'm thinking, how can I take care of your need? Because guess what? He wired within us that when I'm meeting her need, it is covering the basis to help her get to the point that sexual intimacy makes sense.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense outside the context of the non-sexual touch and romance being present. It doesn't make sense to her.
And for the wife, enthusiastically ministering to his needs, and let God handle my needs. But if I'm fighting to have me taken care of, I'm going to have to destroy the relationship, and then I still won't get my needs met, right? And so what we would say to leave here, it's all about, what does God say in his word? A spouse, we've shared a lot of scriptures with you, right? What does God say a spouse ought to do? Not what should my spouse do, what should I do? And will I be obedient to my God and believe that he knows what he's talking about? I can't keep looking at the spouse and finding fault with the spouse. I am not Holy Spirit. I have to release my spouse and love my spouse wholeheartedly, exactly as he or she is at this moment.
This is an exciting journey, and I think that whatever level of discomfort that you've experienced in your relationship, because we all experience discomfort in the relationship, we always get those ouch moments where maybe something happened and it hurt or offended us, right? But I encourage you, push past those walls, push past those barriers, not with a bulldozer, right? But I'm saying you open up and you go back and you ask the uncomfortable questions, and you go to the uncomfortable places and you talk about those things that we can't talk about anymore because of the way he acts or because of the way she acts. You go back and you revisit those things and you resolve those issues that you forgot about in your past and you quit dealing with. We've done that just in the last, since we've been working on this material, things that we quit talking about because we couldn't go there, and we went there, I'm not telling you,
There's hurdles, no matter how deep you go.
I don't know, a
They're
matter
still-
of weeks
they're in that
ago,
journey.
and Rhonda brought up something, I don't remember what it was, but she brought up something that I wasn't comfortable talking about, but I went there. And I talked with her about something that was revealing something in me, a hurt in me that happened, and I shut down. But I went there, and I was uncomfortable and got breakthrough in my life because I went there.
And then this man will sensitively listen to me share my thoughts and feelings. And sometimes it's challenging, and I can see on his face that it is sometimes. But I don't use that moment, obviously, in monologue and go on and on. But because he allows me to talk about what I deal with and what I need to talk about, it exposes me. because these things bring us out into the open. And then I have to say, well, why did I have a negative feeling in that moment? Because I think there's something in my heart, not you, that I need to deal with, right? I need him to know, hey, certain things stir up this negative emotion. I'm having trouble getting over this, but it's like, why does this happen every time? Something's going on in here. And we look together at that. Well, what's happening? You know, and that's when you go deeper, that you can talk about those things. But if you ask questions and pursue your spouse, seek your spouse out to know and understand your spouse, not to be known and to be understood. That's the wrong goal. But to understand the spouse. How can I know you better? What one thing would you like me to know about you? What one thing could I change that would be great for you in our marriage? And then I want to prayerfully consider that. That was a lot of steps. I don't think it was one little
And I love this statement. And many times it's come back to me as famous saying, it's better to understand than to be understood. How much effort are we putting out to understand?